needs therapy. Before I went, I was positive I knew the answer. Crazy people, weak people, broken people, and women. I see so clearly now what a self-defeating exercise it was to build walls around my heart to keep me from being hurt. Of course, I can also see that something good came out of it. That my being closed off and unavailable for years kept me available long enough for Rachel to grow up, turn 19, and meet 27-year-old, partially broken me. Rachel and I first dated when I was 26 years old, and she was 18, going on 29. She was a baby. She was a small baby rabbit. I was the scene from Swingers, afraid that I might shred her to pieces with my bear claws. Was it Swingers? Was it Of Mice and Men? Somewhere there's a story about a bear that has a small rabbit in its clutches and the baby rabbit dies. Fuck is this book? Hello friends, it's Savvy, the internet's favorite toxically masculine MILF. I wanted to say something other than gay aunt from the 80s today. Welcome to our very first episode of Deep Daves, the show where we dive deep into guys named Dave. Sometimes we dive deep into the buttholes of buttholes named Dave. Today's first subject, Dave Hollis, former head of global distribution at Disney, former CEO of the Hollis company, and all-around cringy dad that I would make drop me off 2 blocks away from the party. Today we are going to be reviewing his book, which is called Bro Wash Your Balls. No, his book is called Get Out of My Dreams, Get Into My Car, and Other Things I Used to Say to My 19-year-old Girlfriend. Nope! This book is called Get Your Head Out of Your Own Butthole, a frat boy's guide to becoming a white savior. Nope, let's try one more time. Get Out of Your Own Way, a skeptic's guide to growth and fulfillment. Aren't there like 25 other books called Get Out of Your Own Way? Be original, Dave.
Dave! 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 Dave!
From the standpoint of, ooh, you will not go unpunished.
You guys asked for it.
What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business. Today, we are going to be reviewing a book by a businessman. Couldn't be more perfect for this channel. A lot of you guys might think I'm exaggerating when I say that this is literally the worst book I've ever read. Okay, hear me out. I did a review of Girl Stop Apologizing, written by this man's ex-wife, and that book offended me. I did a review of Grant Cardone's Be Obsessed or Be Average, where he talks about how he stalked his wife for over a year. That book offended me. But you know what? When you're offended, at least you're feeling something. Dave cannot write. Holy shit. But that wouldn't be enough to say for a deep Dave. Before we get too deep into the review, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel every Friday morning at 11 a.m. Central, and sometimes multiple other times throughout the week. I put out new videos about books and business, and every single weekday morning at 8 a.m. Central, I do a live stream morning show on my second channel called Your Morning Guru, where my friend and I spend each week living the life of a different business guru. Maybe we'll live as Dave Hollis one of these weeks. We did live as his wife Rachel in the past. It was pretty interesting, but make sure you guys are subscribed to that channel as well, because we have a lot of fun over there too. Also, if you want to make fun of Dave, you can check out the Business Guru magnetic poetry mug linked in the description below. So for a brief history of Dave Hollis before I delve too deep into his book, this is kind of hard to do as well because Dave doesn't have that much like biography information about him available out there. He really started like making his entire life public and monetizing everything once he was in his like 40s. As a brief overview, Dave Hollis is the former head of global distribution for the Walt Disney Company. He was also formerly married to Rachel Hollis, who is the author of the New York Times bestselling books Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing. She was also a big motivational speaker who led the Rise conference, where Dave often spoke as well. Dave eventually left the Walt Disney Company and his high-paying job there to become the CEO of his wife's company, the Hollis Company, which was the company that produced the, the motivational self-help books, produced their conferences, put those big Rise conferences on, and then in 2020, Dave and Rachel announced their divorce, which was interesting because they'd been putting on marriage conferences when they're not licensed marriage therapists, and then they got divorced.
And then they get divorced, and then they get divorced, and then they get divorced, and then they get divorced.
Anyway, anyway, I have an entire playlist about Rachel and delving into reviews of her books and reviewing the scammy speeches that she used to give at multi-level marketing conferences and things like that. So that entire playlist is linked up in the cards. As a little bit of context, this book actually came out before Dave and Rachel announced their divorce. However, in the video I did covering their divorce, I talked about how they had admitted when announcing their divorce that their marriage had been in trouble for about 3 years at that point. So back when they were hosting the marriage conferences, back when they were doing all of that and charging people money to get their unlicensed marriage advice, they already knew they were having problems. This book came out while they were still married. He wrote this while they were still married. It's written as if we as the public are supposed to read this thinking of them as a married couple. This entire book is useless for one reason and one reason alone, and that is that Dave discredits his entire argument on page 124. So Dave, in this chapter, is talking about how as a spouse, you're not always going to know the exact thing that your partner or your spouse is going to need from you. I filtered other people's relational feedback based on their track records. Have you been in a situation where the person giving you relationship advice couldn't themselves hold one down? In the same way I wouldn't come to someone who was totally out of shape for advice on working out, the idea of giving weight to the opinions of someone who isn't excelling in their relationship is ridiculous. Plenty of people have tried to tell us the best way Rachel and I should be doing our marriage. If those voices come from people who are killing it in their own relationships, their thoughts are welcome. But if the feedback you're getting is coming from someone who can't keep a steady relationship, you best filter out their feedback, as it does not come from a credible source. You said it yourself, bud. It doesn't come from a credible source. All right, I guess review over. This is what we have to do now. I'm not actually going to burn the book because I'm going to do a giveaway with it. One of you lucky folks is going to win my copy, which has been annotated to shit. So I guess we have to go into this book keeping in mind that nothing Dave says is actually credible in this book because he himself is not a credible source, especially the stuff on relationship advice. We're going to start on page Roman numeral 6. It starts off with an introduction where he talks about how he learned he had to get on the self-improvement train because otherwise Rachel threatened to divorce him. And because he didn't want Rachel to divorce him, he got on the self-improvement train and improved himself and improved his relationship.
And then they get divorced, and then they get divorced, and then they get divorced, and then they get divorced.
On the first page of this book, I immediately questioned, Dave, who is your target audience for this? After working in entertainment for the last 2 decades, and stints that saw me as a tour manager for Beyonce when she was still a Destiny's Child, launching TV shows for Fox, managing celebrity talent at an agency, and most recently working a 17-year gig at Disney as the head of sales for the film studio, I hit bottom. I get that he's trying to say I was on top of the world and then everything went bad, but the bragging just gets to a new level. So the introductory chapter talks about how when Dave and Rachel were on vacation with their kids, she was currently going through edits for the book Girl Wash Your Face. So this would have been probably back in 2018, maybe 2017. So she's going through the edits for that book and she gives the book to Dave to read. And if you guys have read Girl Wash Your Face, you know that when she talks about the beginning of their relationship, she's basically like,
I was a teenager, Dave was a grown-ass man in his late 20s, and we started dating, and he would talk to me about how I'm so young and immature and use that as a way for me to act the way that he wanted to. And then he treated me like a booty call and would just try to fuck me all the time, but I didn't want to have sex with him. But then I decided to have sex with him because otherwise I thought maybe our relationship will fail. So then we had sex, and then he still moved away. And then I told him, Dave, I'm never going to talk to you again because you're an asshole. And then he came to my house the next morning and was like, Rachel, I promise I'll change. And then we got married.
Great marriage you got there. Be a shame if anything happened to it. So anyway, he's reading that chapter of Girl Wash Your Face while they're on vacation. Like, why is he doing work while they're on vacation? Because he's a boss bro, and the boss bro hustle never sleeps. So on the first day of their vacation, Rachel got sick. She had to go to the ER. She's, I don't know, infected with something. So he says, I did what any good dad and husband would do. I left her to rest, called for a sitter to come and take care of the baby, grabbed this book of hers, and made a drink to enjoy by the pool while the boys played. I couldn't tell if that was sarcasm or not. I'm like, I guess you left her to rest, which is good, but why did you hire a babysitter while on vacation? You're on vacation, watch your fucking kids, Dave. So then when they come back from vacation, Rachel says to him,
I'm going to reach for a better version of myself every day. I'm going to do it whether you decide to do it or not. Personal growth is one of the most important values in my life, so I'm going to pursue it every single day. Are you going to choose choose to grow every day, or are you going to tread water? If you aren't growing and I am in 3 months, will we have as much to talk about on date night? In 6 months, will we still make out as often? In a year, will we still be going on dates? In 3 years, will we still be married?
I just wrote, no, lol. This couple sounds like literally the most exhausting couple. So then Rachel takes him along to a personal development conference. Is it a Tony Robbins conference? I'm not sure, but it kind of sounds like one from the description here. He says, I was suspicious of this kind of event in these kind of teachers. I honestly thought they were charlatans peddling feel-good mysticism to weak souls. If I'm totally truthful, I worried she'd come back talking about this cool cult we had to join. Fortunately for me, it was way worse, which is a weird way to talk about things when your company then went and made hundreds of thousands of dollars from having Rachel speak at multi-level marketing conferences. I have linked my anti-MLM playlist up in the cards as well. If you guys don't know why multi-level marketing companies are incredibly harmful and predatory to specifically low-income women, then I highly recommend you watch that entire playlist. However, on page Roman numeral 18. Yes, we're still not out of the introduction. We're still not to page 1 yet. Dave does something thoroughly unexpected. Seriously, guys, he surprised me for the better. Our boy Dave cited a source. The best way out is always through. Poet Robert Frost is one of the few influences from college that I still quote today. I'm sorry, did you just give a quote and then say who said that quote? I guess 1 point for Dave in favor of this being better than Girl Stop Apologizing. However, that is where this book being better ends. Good job, Dave. You did the bare minimum not to be accused of plagiarism. I'm so proud of you. You're such a good boy, Dave. Then on the next page, Dave talks about how he learned that going to therapy is okay and it's not just for losers or women. He says right here, who needs therapy? Before I went, I was positive I knew the answer. Crazy people, weak people, broken people. Women! So I said fuckboy Dave is canon, confirmed. But this is just a piece in Dave's emotional journey, and this is a thread we're gonna see throughout this book, is that everything in this book is just a piece of Dave's emotional journey. Dave is the main character, not just of his story, but of everyone's story. He's the main character of my story, he's the main character of your story, and every other person he encounters in his life and every other group of people is only there to teach him how to be a better version of himself. So when Dave learned that therapy was not just for women, that meant he learned that therapy could benefit him. Instead of reading on the sexist biases that, okay, whatever, Dave. He talks a lot about what he thinks society thinks real men do and what holds real men back from therapy. And in his mind, it's just that people think that therapy is like not a manly thing to do. He never once mentions what I think is the real reason that many specifically working class men haven't been going to therapy, which is that it costs a fuckload and that the US doesn't have any type of universal healthcare system. But Dave, of course, never brings that up because it's not part of his personal growth and his development in his journey as Dave. Then Dave talks all about the tools he gained at the conference where it was probably Tony Robbins speaking and all of the teachers that he met at this conference. And by teachers, he doesn't mean like actual licensed teachers. He means like Tony Robbins types. And he says, if you've ever been skeptical of these tools or thought of those teachers as modern day snake oilsmen who get rich by convincing insecure people to fork over their cash, I get you. I used to be you. And then I wrote, but now I'm the snake oil salesman. Because literally that's what Dave became. He went from being someone skeptical of the snake oil salesman to being like, or I could sell the snake oil myself and I could make the money because I'm Dave and it's all about me. So we finally get out of the introduction, and that's when we get to the first chapter of the book, which starts to get into the book's overall format, which is the exact same format as Girl Wash Your Face. So if you guys remember, Girl Wash Your Face is formatted in terms of each chapter is a lie that Rachel used to believe, and then throughout the chapter, she talks about a story or something she learned in her life that helped her stop believing that lie about life. And I don't think it's a bad format. I just think that it only works if you're someone who knows how to tell stories. And I will give that to Rachel. I do think she's a good writer and she does know how to tell stories. None of the things he tells in here are stories. They're all just more like summaries of things that he did vaguely when he went to work. You're writing a book, Dave? Or are you like making an Instagram story? It reminds me of, have you guys seen the movie Rent? Where the character Mark decides that despite the fact that that BuzzFeed style studio wanted to hire him to make money and give him benefits when all of his friends were dying of drug addictions and AIDS, and instead of taking the job, he was like, no, I need to focus on my art. But his art was really just like an Instagram story that he shot on film, and it was really cringe. That's Dave. So in the first chapter, the lie is called My Work is Who I Am, and then throughout this chapter, Dave decides to talk about how he learn to define himself by more than just his work. Let's see if Dave feels super relatable to the average reader like you and me. Ironically, the low point in my professional career was when I had the highest paying job and the most significant title I'd ever had. I was the head of sales at the Walt Disney Company's movie studio. In the simplest of terms, as a president of distribution, I sold movies to theaters. I'd been doing this for 7 years of a 17-year Disney career, and we were on a run. I don't mean we had some hit movies. I mean we had all the hit movies. We set every record. How could we not? I came into the job on the heels of the company's acquisition of Pixar, and not long after the settling in, we acquired Marvel Studios and then Lucasfilm. In what will likely be regarded 100 years from now as the beginning of the golden age for any movie studio ever, the collection of Disney's live-action films like Beauty and the Beast and The Jungle Book and animated films combined with the superhuman consistency from Pixar, the unprecedented Marvel run, roughly $10 billion in box office earnings during my time, and the phenomenon of Lucasfilm, all things Star Wars came together to make box office history. While I was distribution chief, we had the biggest year in the history of the business and followed that with the second biggest year ever. We released 9 of the 10 most successful opening weekends ever. We had the biggest overseas numbers. We established our brand as the most prolific in entertainment, and in doing so, built something unlike anything the movie industry had seen up until that point. I had the best team in business by a stretch. I was like, show me your Disney NDA, Dave, because why are you still sucking Disney dick so hard when you have not worked at this company for years? I'm not a huge fan of Disney. I like some Disney movies. I think they can be fun. I even have some Zootopia characters on the shelf behind me and stuff like that. But overall, Disney to me signifies big business that's eating out all the other companies and trying to create something that's like, we're too big to fail, which is basically what Dave says throughout this is, Disney was too good to fail. We were too powerful to fail. I also get that what Dave's getting at here, I understand his point, right? Which is that even though from the outside he seems like he has anything anyone could ever want, deep down, he was thoroughly unsatisfied and knew that he wasn't fully fulfilled as a person. Have you guys ever heard the phrase, money can't buy happiness, right? And then a few studies were done that actually showed that up to about $70,000 a year, money absolutely buys happiness, right? It's not because money is the only thing that makes people happy. It's because not having to worry about financial need allows people to pursue things that will bring them joy. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? When we look at Maslow's hierarchy and we see that on the most basic level, we all need food, water, and shelter to survive. If you don't have food, water, and shelter, you are not going to be able to think about pursuing bigger goals than that because your body needs that to get to the next type of goal. So when Dave is talking about a lack of fulfillment here, it's understandable that he personally felt that way, but it does come across as very tone deaf, because I can't imagine that anyone in his audience is experiencing quite the same problem of, everything is great in my life, I just don't feel quite fulfilled enough. You guys remember the other week when Rachel Hollis put up that whole TikTok where she was like, what makes you think I want to be relatable?
What is it about me that made you think I want to be relatable?
I got to where I am and I can afford anything I want in my life because I worked this hard, and I woke up at 4 a.m. and I'm the hardest worker ever.
I worked my ass off to have the money, to have someone come twice a week and clean my toilet. Most people won't work this hard. Most people won't get up at 4 a.m.
And she basically made it sound like that nothing that came into this was luck, and the fact that she was fucking a Disney executive had nothing to do with this and all of that, right? Well, on page 3, literally page 3, Dave basically admits outright that hard work doesn't matter as much as privilege does. And I don't think he meant to admit this, but here's what he wrote. It turns out that selling the Avengers and Star Wars to movie theaters isn't that hard. You don't need to fully understand the economics of how movie theaters work to appreciate that they need big movies to stay in business. So when you're the sales guy asking them to take your movie at a certain rate, there's a little less effort required. So Dave's over here basically like, I didn't work hard. I just had an easy fucking job, dudes. I did nothing and just got rich as hell. He talks back about the beginning of his career. One immediate critique that I had for this chapter was that Dave talks so much about his work at Disney, but he never talks about how he got the job in the first place. And I understand that maybe that's not what people are here for, but when I read books by successful people, I really want to learn from them and learn what they did specifically to become successful. Not what mindsets they adopted, not what principles they live by. I want to know, like, Who did you talk to at Disney? Did you write an email? Did you make a nice cover letter? Did you go to a convention and talk to someone who talked to someone? Like, how did you meet people? Like, I want to know the specifics of it, because that's, I think, what's actually helpful to people. But he never talks about that. It's just like he's just in this job, and I wish he'd talk more about that. But this becomes a recurring problem where he doesn't give details or set scenes for anything. So over here on page 10, he starts with talking about his most humbling experience ever at work. And much like Rachel's greatest failure that she talks about in Girl Stop Apologizing, which is that her book didn't hit the New York Times bestseller list right away. Like, it hit it 10 weeks after release, but it didn't hit it like immediately, but it still hit it. But that was her greatest failure, right? I know, so relatable. Dave talks about his most humbling experience at work, which is when he had to prepare a big presentation. We needed to pick an opening weekend on the calendar for one of our upcoming movies. It was for Johnny Depp, I think. So they were pitching it to Johnny Depp's team, and Dave says, I studied all night and came ready to wow this assembled crowd with my knowledge of the calendar and the history of the movie business and the reasons this date would work better than any other date. I walked into the room and sat across from Johnny Depp's lawyer and agent and manager and publicist and sister. Blah, blah, blah. And then there's this guy, Chuck. I slayed the meeting. First of all, don't slay things, Dave. The meeting is not a dragon. Then it says, after a dramatically long pause, the elder statesman in the room drew his gaze to my right and in a deep, calm voice said, Chuck, what do you think? Chuck smiled wryly under his classic mustache and said, well, in my business, this is a good date. And to a person, the entire room in unison said, sounds good. That's the story. That's the story. Dave gave a big presentation on why he thinks there should be a certain date for the movie's release. Then his superior at work was like, yeah, sounds like a good date. And then everyone in the room was like, yeah, sounds like a good date. So I was like, did I miss something? How is this a humbling experience? You like went to a meeting, gave a presentation, your superior at work was like, yeah, I agree. And then everyone else in the room was like, great, sounds good. Literally, what went wrong? I was so confused. Dave says then, I was mortified. I was frustrated. And I'm like, what did I miss? Like, did Dave like fart during the presentation or something? Because I just don't, like, what happened? He's like, what did this say about who I was if the people I was tasked with getting on board didn't see the authority of my position? And I was like, oh, I guess the thing that was so humbling was that nobody else agreed to that date until his superior at work agreed to it first. And I was like, how is my OCD brain that only picks up on things that are stated directly and cannot draw inferences this big, how is my OCD brain supposed to pick up on the nuances, the tiny ass little nuances of that social interaction? Dave's the kind of guy that would be talking to me on the phone and he would go, well, I'm gonna let you go. And I would think that he's legitimately feeling guilty about having to let me go. And I would be like, no, Dave, it's okay. We can talk for 5 more hours. Literally, I was so fucking confused at what I was supposed to take away from this. And I was like, Dave, that was your big humbling experience, was that you did an okay job at work. So then on page 13, Dave gives us some awesome business guru magnetic poetry. What's up? It came down to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. I came to appreciate that you and you alone have to feel the call on your heart to grow and pursue a life that's better than the one you already have, even if it means shedding the identity you've been comfortable with in the office. And I'm like, okay, Dave, a lot of words to say literally nothing. Chapter 2's title is Business Guru Magnetic Poetry, which is The Lie. The things that have worked are the things that will work. Okay, then on page 23, the funniest fucking thing happens. Like I mentioned earlier, Dave and Rachel seem like their relationship was thoroughly exhausting with how much they're like, are you gonna tread water or are you gonna drown? Are you gonna swim laps all day or are you gonna win the swimming race? They just like threw metaphors at each other all day and told each other that they needed to be a better version of themselves constantly. Their relationship sounds exhausting, and nowhere is that clearer than when Rachel regularly tries to work out issues with Dave by sending him rude emails to his work email while they're working together. Rachel sends Dave this email, and if you guys watched the most recent, not the most recent video I did on Rachel Hollis, not the interview with her employee, well, that one too, but also the one about the TikTok that ended her career, if you've watched that one, you're gonna know why this email is pretty funny. By the way, in this book, Rachel's always right. Like, she's never wrong in this book. Dave is always the one who's wrong, except Dave's not wrong that often either. Dave and Rachel are almost always right. Whenever it's a conflict between Dave and Rachel, she's always right, and whenever it's a conflict between Dave and anyone in the outside world, he might be wrong, but if he's wrong, it's a step on his personal growth journey. So on page 23, Rachel writes Dave this: I know you are passionate about building this company. I know that. When I asked whether or not you're passionate about being CEO of a small business, it's very different than the job you had before. I worry because you seem to be approaching it in the same way. You seem to be doing what you know instead of asking questions, trying to learn, and growing in the areas you aren't as strong. I admit my business weaknesses and failures all the time because in that humility, I'm able to learn and get help. It doesn't feel like you can receive negative feedback ever, even even last night. You never owned any fault. You only blamed the team. I can't stop laughing, so I'm just gonna cut in clips of why this is so funny if you didn't already know. This is where things started, but because I still haven't learned, I didn't respond to these things on Friday that people were upset. I listened to my team instead of my gut. I'm gonna explode, you guys. I'm gonna explode. I listened to my team instead of my gut. I tweeted about this. I'll just read y'all my tweet. If she's this mean to her team publicly, I can't imagine what the meetings are actually like. I run a business too. Yeah, I've only ever hired 5 people, but you know how many times I've publicly blamed them for a mistake? 0. Y'all, over a year ago, I made this video after she plagiarized Maya Angelou, and then her apology, which again was the first indication that she's actually literally incapable of apologizing, was her blaming her team and saying, okay, I'm sorry, but also I didn't actually post it. My team posted it, and then I learned that after that, she fired her social media manager, so she put another woman out of a job because of her, like, I can't believe it. Anyway, she blamed her team publicly instead of, being an actual boss and being a legitimate leader of your company and taking your employees aside and being like, hey, I don't think this is working for our brand or our company, let's talk about it. No, instead she's been publicly shaming her team. So she's up here like, I listened to my team instead of my gut. Basically what she's saying here is, my mistake was that I listened to my employees. This would have been better if I'd handled it myself in the first place. Again, this is about her. She's making it about herself, and she's blaming other people. Rachel's like, Dave.
My husband, Dave. That's Dave.
You keep blaming the team, you dumb fuck. Blaming the team's only okay when I do it, thanks. Then Dave talks about doing the work a lot. I started circling and counting every time Dave said the phrase do the work, because he's like, it's important that you do the work. If you're not doing the work, then you're not growing. You gotta do the work. He never defines what the work means. And I stopped counting after I got to like 13 instances of it. But anyway, page 25, he talks about how he had to roll up his sleeves and do the work. In a world that moves as quickly as the one we're living in, leaning on how you were raised or what you learned in school may very well make you obsolete if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work. Great job, Dave. Very good advice. Then after that, he talks about the importance of asking every possible question. He says there can be a stigma against asking questions. If you ask a question about something you don't know, does it reveal you to be a person that doesn't know everything? You bet. So you have to choose, like I did, whether you want to be revealed as a person who doesn't know everything in the attempt to know more, or if you want to be ignorant and full of pride. You may convince yourself that your pride is worth not knowing as much, but you won't go as far or have nearly the impact as the person who's informed. Couldn't give a single example? For example,
the other day I was at the office and I was dealing with a difficult problem with our lead software engineer, and he was like, oh no, I can't get this new function to work on the website. I really want there to be this interesting function for customers so that when they go to this part of the website, they'll be able to do this interesting feature. And I was like, I want to help you out, but the truth is I don't actually know anything about web development, so that I can better understand the problem. Can you give me a little bit of background? And in that moment, I realized that maybe because I was the guy's boss that I was telling this to, he might have looked at me and said, Dave, how can I trust you as my boss when you don't know everything about web development? But as it turns out, he didn't. And in fact, I got to learn a little something about web development, and we sat down, and here's the conversation.
No, we get nothing like that. That's just a random scenario I just made up that would have been already a better book than this. On page 27, I just wrote, "We get it, Dave! Be it at 20th Century Fox, the talent agency, BNC, Merv Griffin Enterprises, or Disney, I've negotiated business deals for the better part of 25 years. These deals involve the biggest names and brands in entertainment, generated billions of dollars in profit, and the incremental benefit from these transactions improve the economics on our side by 10-digit swings. Big deals, lots of negotiations. Yeah, we get it, Dave. You're rich." Then Dave talks about how he was a clumsy person who thought that he needed to show unwavering strength all the time. He says, "I believe I had to put on a facade of having it all together so I wouldn't somehow compromise my negotiating position. Every single time I'd go in combatively on the other, and the other side would come back at me with a list of reasons why my strong position wasn't reasonable." And I'm like, could you set a scene? Can you give us some dialogue? Can you give us a single example? Or are you just going to say, every day I went into meetings and I had my position like this, and then the other person was kind of like this? Like, Dave, the level, we're going to call him Vague Dave. Dave the Vague. Also on page 31, Dave admits outright that their business's goal was always to be relatable. He said, "I used vulnerability as a strength. Whether you're in a business or personal relationship, being open about the things you're struggling with makes you relatable, allowing you to connect more authentically." Talks about it right there, how relatability was something they used in their business this whole time. When Rachel's like, "What makes you think I'm relatable? I never wanted to be relatable," she's outright lying, because Dave said right here, relatability was basically a marketing tactic for them. Cool story, Dave. And then they say do the work a lot more times. Do the work. Oh, on page 36, he says, "Life is happening for me." Good for you, Dave. Life happens through you. He actually had a pretty decent chapter, which was chapter 5, where the lie is I did something wrong, so I am something wrong. This chapter was good for 2 reasons. One, I agree with the premise of it overall, which is that, like, just because you've made mistakes in your past does not mean that they have to define you forever, and that doesn't mean you're overall a bad person. I think especially in today's day and age on social media, we can get in a trend of, like, trying to dig up everyone's past transgressions and thinking, like, oh my god, if I ever do one thing wrong, it'll be over for me. And I think it's important to remember that we don't have to be defined by our past, and we all do have the ability to keep improving as people, and I do think that's important. The other reason I like this chapter was that he actually told a story. In this chapter, he told a story about how he was valedictorian and he didn't get to walk at graduation because the principal wasn't happy with his graduation speech, so he completely changed it. It was like, "You will stick to this script." And then when he thought he wasn't looking, Dave flipped him off. He gave him the middle finger, and then he got suspended by the principal for giving him the middle finger and wasn't allowed to walk at graduation, and his whole family was very disappointed. I thought that that was an interesting story because he actually told a story with specific examples and talked about what happened and people saying things, and I was like, more of that in this book, please. That's what I've been waiting for. And then right after he told that, he's like, this isn't going to be the longest chapter, and then he basically ends the chapter, and I'm like, cool, so the one where your writing was halfway decent and didn't want to make me fall asleep on the book, you're like, actually, I don't need to say that much more. Bye, guys. Now that we've gotten all of that little stuff out of the way, yes, that was the little stuff, we're gonna move into the big stuff. This is a book that got worse the farther we got into it. The beginning was boring and basic and business guru magnetic poetry, do the work, life's happening for me, over and over and over again. When we get about halfway through the book, Dave starts to show himself as the white savior. Okay, so just real quick, we're going to go over the term white savior if there's anyone here who's not familiar with it. It says right here on Wikipedia, the term white savior or the white savior complex refers to a white person who provides help to non-white people in a self-serving manner. We talk about like performative activism, right? The white savior is a white person who's like, I'm gonna show everyone how much I care about helping other people. I did a video almost a year ago now where I talked about Micah Stauffer, who I think would also really fit this this description of a white savior. Micah Stauffer, if you guys don't remember, was a family vlogger on YouTube who adopted a boy from China and then ended up giving him back. It was an incredibly heartbreaking story, and I am a person who, my dad adopted me as well, so the story really hit hard for me as an adopted person. I'll link that video I did on that up in the cards. She would be an example of a white savior. It was very clear that she thought that she could give this boy a better home in her white home than he would get in China around his own culture, and she never bothered to teach him English or really understood that he didn't understand English because he was new to the country. Like, there were a whole lot of things going on where it's basically someone acting like they in their privileged position know what's best for everyone and they are the ones who must help everyone else. And that's not to say that like helping other people is a good thing, obviously. If someone else needs something and you can be a helpful person or a good friend or lend a hand to someone, obviously do that. But it's more about thinking that you have the authority and that you know more than someone else about their own life, or that and primarily there's a motivation there of making yourself look and feel good as opposed to doing it for truly selfless reasons, if that makes sense. It really came across this way to me in this part of the book, starting in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is where it becomes crystal clear that Dave sees himself as the protagonist of his own story, and that all other people who have been hurt along the way, or all other people who have had to deal with difficult situations, were there to teach him something. So let's take a look at page 82. So in this chapter, Dave and Rachel are wanting to adopt a daughter together. And as you guys know, I think adoption is wonderful. I've told you guys I'm adopted. So I think adoption can be a wonderful thing when it is done ethically and when it is done in a way that is most beneficial to the child and is also kind to the birth parent. They specifically talked about how they wanted to adopt a child from Ethiopia, and then they were having trouble finding a child in Ethiopia to adopt. So then they decided to try fostering, and then what happened was they got a call from, I guess, the social worker who said, hey, we've got these 2 twin baby girls at the hospital, and their mom was addicted to cocaine. They both have cocaine in their system, and the mom left the hospital and left the girls in the middle of the night. Would you like to foster to potentially adopt these children? We need to know right now. And they were like, absolutely. They took in these 2 black twin and decided to start raising them as their children. Well, as it turns out, the social worker fucked up royally. Like, the social worker fucked up so bad, unless Dave actually fucked up and was blaming the social worker, which, like, anyway, so Dave says on page 82, we got a call about 5 weeks in telling us the outreach that fateful afternoon, the call that had represented the adoptability of these babies and had given us 20 minutes to decide, had turned out to have been a misrepresentation, a story, a thing that a desperate emergency social worker had said, thinking it was a likely scenario that would play out, not knowing there was a biological family member petitioning the courts in the background for custody of our daughters. Well, our daughters is a misnomer. They weren't ours. I'm glad he realizes that they weren't theirs, but it was 5 weeks they had these kids, and then the social worker's like, he just says a biological family member here. It becomes clear on the next page that it's the dad. Like, the social worker didn't check to see if the biological dad was still in the picture. So the mom, I'm assuming the parents weren't married, because if the mom had the kids without the dad there and then left and then the dad was still in the picture but the mom wasn't, then they probably were not together, I imagine. You wouldn't immediately be like, oh, the mom isn't going to raise these kids. Maybe the dad would be the next option. Like, that didn't enter this fucking stupid social worker's mind. Dave is all kinds of broken up, which let me be very, very, very clear. Because someone did, when I posted this in my Instagram story and I presented this as like, can you believe Dave's acting this way? And someone presented the alternate viewpoint of like, honestly, it's probably coming from a place of hurt from him, where, like, he really did get emotionally attached to these kids that he adopted, and now they're getting taken away, and he wasn't expecting it. And we're gonna see on the next page how Dave's reaction to this is not very good, but I understand how it's probably coming from a place of hurt. So I'm not blaming Dave for feeling upset, for having those emotions, for feeling disappointed. I'm upset at him for the way he framed it in this book. Dave never really delves into, looking back, it was a really hurtful experience at the time, and it hurt me a lot. But now I realize, looking back, that I'm thankful that the children's biological father was in the picture, because these kids actually had a great situation and a good home life for them going all along. And while I was still going to continue my journey to find the right daughter for our family, I'm grateful that these kids had someone in their life. Instead, he really makes it all about him. He says right here on page 84, I took this experience, It took this experience to change my thinking. As hard as it was to watch, the impossibility of fixing what was happening in our lives showed us the incredible power of enduring, proving to us as a family that we were up for it all. We came out the other side stronger, even though it required discomfort and tears and uncertainty. And I'm like, Dave, these two black baby girls were not put in your life as a white man to be side characters in your life story to teach you a lesson about resilience. Stop reducing other humans to plot devices in your life story when you're the center of your own universe. Then on the next page, it talks about how he and Rachel reached out to the biological dad. Rachel asked me to reach out to the twins' biological dad to see if we could bring him some food, bring them some clothes, do something. And at first I'm like, oh, that's a nice gesture. Like, hey, we're glad you're actually there in the kid's life. We're sorry this happened, but you know what? We love the kids, so we wanted to give you something for them. It seemed like a nice gesture until he explained what his motivation was. He says, to see if we could do something, anything, to help with the closure we were looking for so desperately. So this was never about the kids. This was about Dave wanting a conclusion to the lesson that these kids were there to teach him. Dave, not everything's about you, buddy. And then this is going to be a constant theme that we're going to continue to see later in the book, where Dave tends to look at women, racial minorities, and the LGBT community as someone he's an ally to, which is good. It's good to be an ally. But he looks at those groups of people that way and specifically talks extensively about what they taught him about becoming a better straight white man for himself. Literally, we're about to go into all this. So anyway, after they call the baby's biological dad, the dad says, no, I don't really want you in my kid's life at all, which is entirely fair because can you imagine what this biological dad went through? A social worker fucked up. The kid's biological mom didn't want to be involved. The social worker fucked up and didn't even think to contact the dad. Like, it was just like, actually, I'm going to give these babies to complete strangers instead. And then the dad was like having to go and deal with the legal implications of this just to get his own children that he never gave up in the first place back. Like, I cannot imagine what this man's going through. And so I don't think it was a mean that they tried to contact him. Like, I understand, well, I mean, their heart wasn't in the right place, but I understand in another circumstance how their heart could have been in the right place. But I also think it's totally fair that he was like, no, I don't want to do that. But here's what Dave says about that. He politely declined. He didn't want anything to do with us and didn't want us in his daughter's lives. We were on the other side of what would have been a battle for custody, so it was hard for him to appreciate the rationale behind our request. Dave, I don't think it was hard for this man to do anything. I think the rationale behind your request was selfishness. Just admit it.
Hey y'all, Editing Savvy here. I just want to clarify something real quick because when I had been talking about this topic on Instagram, I got a few comments from people being like, how is this necessarily white saviorism, right? So I just wanted to talk about why I thought that was real quick to clarify. I had a few people being like, okay, but a white people adopting a black child is not always going to be white saviorism. And I completely agree. I don't think there's any problem with interracial adoptions when they're done with the child's best interest in mind. It's really the fact that, as we're going to see throughout the book and as we get deeper into the book, when Dave does talk about becoming an ally for other people and using his straight white man privilege to be an ally for people in other situations and things like that, he really does keep the centered focus on him the entire time. He talks about what it does for his personal journey. And that's how he framed this here as well with these kids, was it was about what they taught him, what he wanted for his family having a daughter. So that's why it came across that way to me, was because it was self-centered on Dave the entire time and what a good person he was for adopting and being a better parent instead of focusing on the kids and what's best for them and what's best for their biological dad and all of that. So I hope I cleared that up a little bit, but if you guys still have any questions about that, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I had a lot of people agreeing that they saw it this way as well, and then I had a few people being like, well, wait, just because it's an interracial adoption doesn't automatically make it white saviorism or it doesn't make it a bad thing. And I agree. I think that there are definitely situations where a parent of any race can adopt a child of any race, and if that adoption is done with the right care and done with the child's best interest in mind the entire time, then absolutely that can be a loving and wonderful relationship. However, I think that from here we really see the example of Dave focusing on him, focusing on how he wants this to benefit his family and how he thinks that he's the right one for these kids, and never really stopping to be like, wait, the fact that the biological dad was in the picture the entire time was actually great. It really seems like a self-centered way of going about it. And the reason that I was bringing the fact that Dave is white into this is that we're going to go into a chapter a little bit later on in the video where he talks about how he tries to use his privilege as an ally, and once again keeps himself in the very self-centered position of making it all about him. So that's why I was saying this, and I hope that makes sense. But I just wanted to clarify, if you are an adoptive parent of a child of a different race than you, I'm not saying that what you did is a bad thing whatsoever. I am saying that the way that Dave approached this seemed very tone deaf.
And then at the end of the chapter I wrote, at least he told a real story this time. So on page 91, Dave talks about how the lie he used to believe was I could just phone it in. And this is about how he learned that he has to always put in his best effort. Innovative advice. I never would have guessed that putting in my best effort would help. Thanks, Dave. So Dave starts off by talking about how back in high school he was a telemarketer who liked to sell people European dream vacations and try to sell people into timeshare clubs. So I was like, Dave's been a scammer from the beginning? And I was wondering if maybe on the next page Dave would be like, now that I'm an adult, I realize that selling people on timeshares is a scam, and back impressionable high school me shouldn't have gotten roped into it. But then that would be a problem because of the fact that he and his wife, or ex-wife now, Rachel, had been selling people on staying in MLMs and collecting six-figure speaking deals to speak at the MLM conferences, so I don't think that Dave is allowed to say anything's a scam when he himself is a scam. He talks about how he learned to work through objections and turn to a yes, so I just wrote MLM shit, zero self-awareness. Now Dave talks about how at work he couldn't phone it in then, and he can't phone it in now. He says, even if my boss would be happy with me giving a 70% effort, might I feel a greater sense of satisfaction by leaning in with all I have? Though I could get away with letting the kids sit on technology all weekend while Rachel's out of town, what would it look like to push into being an exceptional dad who is actively present rather than being satisfied with us just surviving her time away? And I'm like, Dave, you are literally phoning it in with your kids, because every time I go on your goddamn Instagram story, you are got your phone in your kid's face. You're literally phoning it into their face, saying, hey child, be on daddy's Instagram story. Hello child, please do funny kid thing for Instagram story. He's like putting invasive shit, like it's gross. I'm not even going to put in any bits of Dave's Instagram stories here because I don't believe in people exploiting their kids online for content like this. We're getting into an age now where kids are getting older, and kids who grew up with influencer parents are starting to have opinions about the fact that their entire childhood was publicized online and that they never got to choose to have any privacy of their own life. So I think that's pretty gross. Here's my child's potty training. So like, dude, no one wants to hear about your child taking a shit. Like, stop that. That's gross. And then he'll be like, here, my daughter and I are doing a tea time video series and I'm going to write a book about it. And I'm like, Dave, stop recording your children. Play Tea Party with your daughter and have fun if you want. Don't play Tea Party with your daughter for your Instagram content and then write a book and monetize that. Like, just let your daughter be a kid. Like, stop. She's grown up with a phone in her face the entire time. I feel so bad for this little girl. Hello, everyone. It is a new day. It's a new day here on the Savvy Writes Books channel. I've got my Business Guru Magnetic Poetry mug still, using the same mug because this book is all Business Guru Magnetic Poetry, but I could not finish reviewing this last night because I just ran out of time. There's so much shit to talk about in this book, so let's get back to it. By the way, if you like the Your Morning Guru hoodie and the 10X Me Daddy hat, check them out on the Your Morning Guru merch site for my podcast, linked in the description below. Let's get back to this bullshit book. Alright, chapter 11 is The Lie Is If She Doesn't Love Me, I'm Not Lovable. So Dave starts off by talking about this relationship that he had when he was, I think, in his early 20s. He seemed to be like super in love with her, everything was going great, and then one day he caught her cheating on him, and his heart was shattered, and then from then on, he built up walls. Like, this is very cliche. I mean, I feel bad for Dave for getting cheated on. I'm not trying to say that his emotions there were wrong or anything. Like, I think that it's great that he's being open about his emotions and the difficulties he experienced during that time. But again, the story is just told in a very bland way. Like, And then I caught her cheating on me. And then I built walls around my heart and wouldn't let anyone in. I do think it's a little interesting to see Dave's side of the story of the place that he was in when he first met Rachel, because like we talked about when reading Girl Wash Your Face, in her chapter about meeting him, it was very much like Dave was a huge fuckboy, he was an older guy, I was a teenage girl, he basically treated me like a booty call, he was awful, but then I fixed him. It was toxic there, it's toxic here. It is interesting to get Dave's side of the story and to hear how he's like, well, at the time I was coming off of, you know, having trouble having steady relationships because I'd recently been cheated on and I was having trouble trusting and things like that. So it was interesting to see his side, but it wasn't that interesting because the man can't write. He talks about how when he first met Rachel, he was very impressed by her as a person and he knew that they were like destined to be together or whatever. He like felt it in the stars, and because of that he was extra afraid of messing it up, like he didn't want to get cheated on or hurt again. So he, you know, closed himself off and wasn't the available boyfriend that she needed, and he was afraid of failure and all of that, and that's how he, you know, learns his lesson. But the worst part of this chapter comes on the following page, where he says, I see so clearly now what a self-defeating exercise it was to build walls around my heart to keep me from being hurt. Of course, I can also see that something good came out of it. That my being closed off and unavailable for years kept me available long enough for Rachel to grow up, turn 19, and meet 27-year-old partially broken me. God bless the silver linings. Good Lord, Dave, good Lord. Let me make something real clear real quick, because some people in the past have brought up that, you know, my aversion to Dave and Rachel's age gap seems a little judgmental. So I want to make something very clear up front, and that's that I do not have a problem with age gaps in relationships. If you are a couple years older than your spouse, or even a decade older than your spouse, whatever, as long as everyone was a fully consenting adult at the beginning, I am not here to judge you as a person. Now, I personally see it as a bit of a red flag when one of the people who's in the relationship with a significant age gap has the word teen anywhere in their age number. So if you are 18, 19, and the other person is in their late 20s, that does come across as a red flag to me. I have had a few people in the comments say things to me like, well, you know, I was in my teen years and my spouse was in their late 20s when we met, and we've been happily married for 50 years. And it's like, you know what? I'm happy for you. Like, I'm not going to tell you that your marriage is bad. You know why? Because I'm not a licensed marriage therapist, and I can't tell you what's the right decision for you. However, I will say that as a whole, I do not support people who are in their mid to late 20s dating people that have teen anywhere in the number. Like, I'm not going to tell you that your current marriage is bad because that happened in the past, but I am never going to support that happening in the future. And the reason for that is just, it is too easy for teenagers to get exploited. I hear too many stories of teenagers who were told, you know, oh, I met a man in his late 20s when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, and he told me, oh, you're so mature for your age. And then it turns into a very manipulative relationship real quick. And I know that any relationship can turn manipulative or abusive regardless of age, but when someone is in their teenage years and their brain is not all the way developed yet, I've read that the brain finishes developing usually around ages 25 or 26, like that's when the frontal lobe finishes developing. So when you are in your teen years, you haven't really been living on your own much yet, and you are just not in that position to have brain development or the life experience to understand and recognize those signs of manipulation, then someone who's older than you does have that ability to hold that power over you, especially if they're in a more financially stable position than you and things like that. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not here to judge anyone who is in a long-term marriage that started out with an age gap or that has an age gap in their relationship or anything like that. But do I support teenagers dating people in their mid to late 20s? No. Absolutely not. Never. And you're not going to convince me to support it. I'm sorry. So am I always against an 8-year age gap? No. If you're 30 and your spouse is 38, cool. Good for you. Happy for you guys. Am I always going to say that someone in their teens and someone in their 20s can't date? No. If you're 19 and your significant other's 21, great. Have a good time. I don't personally think this is ethical though. Anyway, at the bottom of page 106, Dave basically contradicts the entire purpose of this book once again, where he says, The sooner you come to appreciate that you are enough as you are, that you are as good as you are, that you are worthy as you are, the sooner you'll be available to connect meaningfully in relationships as your true self. And I was like, so there was no self-improvement necessary this whole time. But also, in Girl Wash Your Face, Rachel made it very clear that Dave changed himself for her. He, like, changed his entire fuckboy persona so that he could be a good partner for her. And he's talking here about how it's all about just being yourself. But he also talks about how he did have to change because he was building up walls and not being emotionally vulnerable and open. So that sounds like he wasn't completely good as he was. And also, why would you position this message of you're perfect as you are, don't change a thing, if you're also selling self-improvement books? Because the whole basis behind self-improvement books is that there are things you could be doing better, right? I'm just so lost at this point on what Dave's purpose even is with any of this. But let's continue on to the next chapter. He talks about how men showing emotion is good. I totally agree. Show emotion. Everyone should show emotion whenever they want to. Then in the next chapter, he talks about love languages and the Enneagram tests. I personally think the love languages, I don't know much about the Enneagram. I know that love languages have been really useful for me, but it's a thing that I talked about like in therapy with my actual therapist, which is that I am someone who communicates a lot through words, and some people communicate a lot through actions or through something else. And because of that, you know, if someone isn't telling me the exact words I need to hear, I need to make it clear that that's what I need from them. I think that that's perfectly fine, because I think recognizing that we do communicate in different ways goes a long way to help avoid misunderstandings. So I think the fact that he brought it up is good, and yeah, good for him. But basically this chapter is just him summarizing other people's ideas, which is good. I'm glad he's giving credit. Like, I will give him credit for giving credit. But at the same time, it's like, I could have bought those books. I bought this book. So, like, what new are you bringing to the table? Nothing, because Dave has no qualification in any of this. He's just really summarizing other people's ideas. So this chapter was nothing new, but I personally like the love languages concept, and I'm willing to learn more about the Enneagram concept. In chapter 14, the lie that he's debunking is called My Role in This Relationship is Constant. So it's all about how your role in your relationship to someone else is going to evolve over time, which on the surface I agree with. He starts off the chapter by saying, if you find yourself thinking you'll succeed in your relationship by holding tight to the role you currently play, the identity you presently carry, or the version of how you show up today for the balance of your relationship, you're either wrong or destined to be done with this relationship sooner than you'd like. And I wrote here, like, Dave, we already established that you're not a credible source on this. You established that literally on the previous page, that you're not a credible source. And now you're like, okay, well, if you don't follow my advice, your relationship might be over soon. I'm like, Dave, actually, your relationship was the one that was over soon. So what the fuck are we supposed to think here? So let's get to page 128, which is literally the worst page of this book. Like, I wanted to literally vomit reading this page. This was the grossest thing I'd ever read in my life. Get ready, guys. Here we go. Dave says, back at the very, very beginning of our marriage, I thought so differently than I do now about who Rachel was and how I should be a partner for her. Rachel and I first dated when I was 26 years old and she was 18 going on 29. We're gonna unpack that, don't worry. She was a baby. She was a small baby rabbit. I was the scene from Swingers, afraid that I might shred her to pieces with my bear claws. Was it Swingers? Was it Of Mice and Men? Somewhere there's a story about a bear that has a small rabbit in its clutches and the baby rabbit dies. I think I just need to take a break from humanity after this. I posted this on my Instagram page and someone gave me a fantastic comment, which was, what a terrible day to be literate. I'm over here here I am reading books. I love reviewing books, and then that gets printed in a book. You guys know how on this channel I'm always ranting about the publishing corporation industry. I'm all support small businesses, small presses, self-publishing, all of that kind of stuff. The indie world, that's where it's at. The big 5 publishing corporations do not need to control the industry. And then I get in arguments with people sometimes because they're like, but quality control in literature. If anyone can just put books out there, who's gonna make sure that the books that are put out there are good? And then we get a book from HarperCollins, one of the top 5 biggest publishing houses in the United States, and they put out this line that says, I was 26, she was 18, she was a baby, she was a small baby rabbit, I was afraid I might shred her to pieces with my bear claws. And they print that? Okay, you guys know I am in favor of anything being able to be printed. I am a free speech advocate until the end of time. But my point here is that big publishing houses do not ensure quality control in literature, and they never will. Couple that with the fact that Dave literally can't write, as I've been talking about this entire review, how this book is boring as shit and says nothing, even though it uses a lot of words. And I'm just like, okay, so where did your publishing contract come from? Oh, it was just the fact that you're a really famous person with a lot of followers who are guaranteed to buy the book. Guess it was never about literary value or anything like that the entire time. Of course it's about profit. Book publishers are a business, obviously. But my point is that the whole quality control in literature argument is stupid and outdated and needs to go. Support small businesses. 90s Kids, my novel's coming out through a small, woman-owned small press. It is coming out this June. Link in the description below. It's available for pre-order right now. Anyway, now that I've done a self-promo, let's get into how terrible this is, because guys, look at how much this is annotated. Like, we are not even done. We are not even close to done. Let's start with the least egregious of it. Let's start with the part that is the least bad, which is where he's like, which movie was this? Was it Swingers? Was it Of Mice and Men? I don't know, Dave. You're the one who spent 25 years working in the movie production and distribution industry. How about you know what movie your reference is from? I don't know, Dave. You're the one with a book contract with one of the top 5 publishers in all of book production in the US. How about your editor fact checks that for you? Is it quirky? Fellas, is it quirky to not know what movie my reference is from? Is it relatable to admit outright in the print that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about? So I was just like, that's stupid. That's very stupid. So that was the least egregious. Now let's get into the rest of it. We covered a little bit how I personally think their age gap was predatory, how being 18 years old, guys, I didn't know shit at 18. I thought I knew shit at 18. You thought you knew shit at 18. And at 18, we still have so much more to learn. But let's talk about this line he has right here. How Rachel was 18 going on 29. You know what is a big red flag when you're in a relationship with someone much older than you? Is if they drop the line, you're mature for your age. He's talking about, oh, Rachel's only 18, but she was basically 29 because she was so mature for her age. If someone tells you, if you are watching this right now and you are younger than me, I'm 28. If you're significantly younger than me and you're watching this right now, and someone who wants to date you tells you that you are so mature for your age, you need to run for the fucking hills. I don't care what they say. Like, you need to run, dude. You need to run. Generally, someone who believes that they're mature for their age as well also has come from some type of systemic disadvantage in their life. And generally that comes from a lack of class privilege. So for example, if you come from a more low-income household, and because of that, your parents are working more, and maybe you only have one parent instead of 2 parents, and you have to work from a young age to help support them, and you're raising your younger siblings, and you're taking on more adult roles from a younger age, then it's very easy to believe that, yeah, maybe I am mature for my age, because other teenagers are just off, playing video games and going to the mall or whatever. Do people go to the mall anymore? I don't know. I feel old. But they're just doing that. Meanwhile, I am the one taking care of my siblings. I'm the one working to support my family, things like that. And so then it's very easy to believe that, yes, maybe I am mature for my age. Maybe when this adult man comes to me and says, oh, you're not like other teenagers, you're mature for your age, and that's why I want to date you, not so that I can manipulate you. It's very easy to fall into that, because even if you are taking on more of those adult roles, you still don't have the years of life experience. Adult men stop dating teenagers challenge. So that line just stood out to me as a red flag, where it was like, Rachel was mature for her age. Because I've said a lot of things about Rachel and how I think she's, a scammy person, how I think she's been kind of a huge dick lately. But the fact is, Rachel came from a low income background. Rachel left her house at 17 years old and had been living on her own. She was in a prime position for a rich older guy like Dave to come in and use those manipulation tactics on her. Am I saying that Dave was a manipulative, abusive partner at the beginning? No, I'm not. I don't know the ins and outs of their relationship, and I would have no evidence to support that. What I am saying is that there are a lot of red flags in here. And if there are young men who are maybe 25, 26 years old reading this and thinking about how there's this teenage girl that they think is cute who's kind of mature for her age and they want to go for it, then they better fucking not. Dave could be doing a lot of harm to the young men that he's supposedly helping with this book. So that's all I'm saying. That just grossed me out beyond belief. Do not tell teenagers they're mature for their age. They're not. Literally no teenagers are mature for their age. Are there teenagers that might be smarter at one topic than another? Sure. Are there teenagers that might be a math or science genius? Absolutely. Are there teenagers that might understand how to do taxes from an early age because they were tasked with that? Sure. But nobody is universally mature for their age. It doesn't happen. Okay? Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Let's continue. The whole thing with like, I'm afraid I might shred her to pieces, the baby rabbit dies. I get that he's trying to use some kind of figurative language here to make it interesting. This whole book I've been complaining about how his writing's not interesting enough. But honestly, if that's what it takes for him to be an interesting writer, I'd rather him just bore me to death, because that is gross as fuck. After he talks about the movie where the baby rabbit dies and how he's worried he's gonna accidentally shred his teenage girlfriend to death with his bear claws, I almost vomited saying that. Chewie's barking in the background because he's like, fuck off, Dave! Chewie's like barking at Dave doing guard dog shit. I love it. Let's go into the next section where he says, swallowing bile, hold on. I came into our relationship with this worldly, I've lived more years than you-ness that when combined with my more traditional upbringing in a house where my father worked and my mother stayed home, had me presupposing some of the roles, gender roles, relational roles, that each of us should play. As for how I played the role of the man in the relationship, I thought it was my job to take care of this woman. So Dave outright admits right here. I was like, I'm gonna give Dave the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe he wasn't trying to hold over her how he's older than her. But nope, he says right here, I came into the relationship immediately like, well, I've lived more years than you, so I know what's right for you, even though I want to be in a sexual relationship with you. Nope. And then he talks about how he came from a traditional upbringing where his father worked and his mother stayed home. Like, Dave, you were 26 years old. You'd been working for movie companies in California, in Los Angeles, in one of like the largest cities in the US, full of a wildly diverse range of people, and you're 26 years old and you still haven't like noticed that not everyone does things the way your parents did things. Like you had, like that hasn't entered your brain yet. It took you all of this time to realize that. Like, Dave, I'm sorry, but that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Again, get your head out of your own butthole, Dave. So let me just read this real quick because I almost don't know what parts to pull out. This is all just so bad. To be clear, I hope you do have the compulsion to take care of the person you're in a relationship with, but the problem in my thinking that was the implication that she could not take care of herself. It knows so very clear now that Rachel Hollis can take care of herself. I know that now, and I wish I'd known it then, but at that time, I felt I had a handle on the way the world worked, and I thought my job was to take care of her. A major part of that was financial. I'd been working for a longer period of time and was making more money than she was at that point. Yeah, I mean, most adults who are pushing 30 are making more money than teenagers, but okay. I saw my role as provider. The unspoken darker side to my thinking, whether it was conscious or unconscious, was the assumption that since I made more money, I had permission to not be engaged in the things that were required to make a house a home. My expectations at the beginning of our marriage made more sense to my parents than they truly did to me. If you don't have a conversation about who's going to do the cooking or the cleaning or what it means for one person in a relationship to make more money, and whether making more money somehow absolves you of doing chores around the house or lets you off the hook for having to cook dinners, I promise that's a recipe for a lot of friction in your relationship. I can see in retrospect that my assumption that Rachel just needed me to be the provider was simply wrong. What she needed at the beginning of our marriage was for me to approach it as a partnership where we were openly and honestly had conversations about who was going to do what, and we shared the load of this life we were starting together. Guess what? I was young and dumb and had to learn this the hard way. So there's just so much, like, I don't know if I'd call it male ego, like men just trying to absolve themselves of responsibility here, where Dave's like, here's the thing, guys. I was a man who was raised in a traditional house, so like I just didn't know these things. Like I'm a stupid man. I don't know better. I was young and dumb. Dave, you were almost 30. You were in your late 20s. You were not younger or dumber than your significant other who was in her teen to early 20s years at this point. You do not get to use the I was young and dumb excuse. You were a grown-ass man, Dave. Just the whole, I was young and dumb. I'm just a man, forgive me. Oh, fuck off. Maybe Rachel could use the young and dumb excuse here, because she was the young one. You were a fully grown adult. You were a fully grown adult with a high-paying job, David. A few years into being married, we had kids. Though I was supportive during Rachel's pregnancy, sympathizing with its impact on her changing body and emotions to the best of my ability, it was hard for me when the baby finally arrived. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Some things inherently came along with motherhood that bonded my wife with our son. The baby had grown inside her body and was fed by her body, so I struggled to find my place, my sense of connection. Their bond reinforced my belief that my primary role was simply to provide for their sustenance. My response after the first couple of weeks was, hey, I've got to get back to work, so I need to make sure I can get a little bit more sleep. What I didn't say but implied was, I need to get more sleep than you because my job requires me to be awake in a way that your job doesn't. To be clear, Rachel's job while she was on maternity leave was taking care of a human being whose life depended on her being awake enough to care for him. The only reason I have a 12-year-old today is that she was able to keep him alive when I went back to work. Back then, though, I rationalized wanting to sleep on a couch away from the baby with the money that might come from doing better at my job, and I gave earning money more value than Rachel sleeping enough to care for our first son. Rachel's on maternity leave and is not going to her job, which I think at this point she was running her party planning company, Chic Events, so she's not going to work doing the events right now. She's taking maternity leave at home. Did Disney not give Dave paid parental leave? Does Disney not provide paid parental leave for their employees? Like, why did Rachel have to stay home with the baby by herself? That's what I want to know. Why did Dave have to go back into work at this point? Was Disney not providing paid parental leave? Because Disney, I just want to talk. Like, Disney, you're one of the biggest companies in the entire US. Dave's over here like, what's up, guys? Disney's the best ever. I made so much money at Disney. We were too big to fail. We put out the best movies of all time. I was great at Disney. And you were required to go back into work while your wife was still on maternity leave? Am I hearing this correctly, Dave? Am I hearing this correctly? Because that kind of sounds like Disney didn't give you paid parental leave. And maybe they did and it was shorter than Rachel's, which is still bullshit because you should have been home with her with that baby too. I'm sorry if anyone disagrees with me on that. Disney at the size that it is has absolutely no excuse for not giving Dave the same amount of paid parental leave that his wife was getting with her own business. Disagree in the comments if you want. But let's just talk about this whole thing where Dave's like, I thought my role as a man was to be a financial provider because that's what my dad modeled for me when I was a kid. I was just a stupid 32-year-old man that didn't know better. I'm just like over here like, Dave, your big revelation and what you learned from this whole life experience by the time you were 32 years old was that your marriage might be different than someone else's marriage. You learned that the person you married might be a little different from your mom. You learned that you didn't marry your literal mom. Is that what you're telling me right now, Dave? That your big revelation, this wisdom you're imparting onto us, is that when you married someone, she wanted different things than what your mom and dad wanted. That different people in this world have different preferences and different things that they want. You didn't develop any sense of human empathy, any ability to see preferences outside of your own until you were in your 30s, Dave? Because I'm concerned about you at this point. Like, I'm concerned. Why was this man running our entertainment industry? Now that we finished with relationship expert Dave, let's move into talking about amazing straight white man ally Dave. So, as I mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about how Dave's adoption story felt like it had tones of white saviorism in it. I'm not going to ascribe motivations to another person, but it definitely felt that way from the outside, and from having a lot of friends who were people of color who have been adopted by white people, that's the similar kind of experience that I've seen people talk about with that. So chapter 16, the lie is called I Know What You've Been Through, and Dave talks about when he was growing up, his town was all white people where the moms all stayed at home and the dads worked. He lived in basically the Leave It to Beaver movie set. That's where Dave lived growing up. And then when he became a fully grown man and started working at high-paying jobs, which is like, first of all, how are you getting high-paying jobs in the movie industry, in one of the most competitive industries ever, if you've never met someone who's not like you? Like, that just really feels like straight white man privilege to me in the first place. Like, what the fuck, Dave? Everything has been handed to this man. So he talks about how his coworker was gay when he started his new job after college. And that's how he learned that gay people are a thing. And he was like, that's cool. That is different from my experience as a straight person, because this person is a gay person. Now I know that there are people different from me in the world. And I was like, wow, Dave, you're so smart. You're in your 20s and you learned that there are people who aren't like you. Good Lord, like, this is just, oh my God. Dave talks about how he made some black friends and he learned that black people deal with police brutality. And he realized that he as a white person had never dealt with police brutality. And he learned that there were people who had different life experiences than him. Wow, Dave. I'm so proud of you. Then Dave talks about, because of course, guys, don't forget, Dave is the hero of this story. This story is not about how Dave realized that it's important to put other people's needs before his own. No, this was all about how Dave decided to become the best ally to all marginalized groups ever. Page 153. One of my prouder accomplishments at Disney, one of his prouder accomplishments, don't forget, was leaving my sales team, which had been historically male-dominated with more women than men on it. My successor was an amazing business leader who also happened to be a woman, who was the only female head of distribution in the industry at the time. It felt like the culmination of effort from all sides. Her years of work in preparation to be the best candidate regardless of gender, my work in the women's task force informing how to build a better team, the company choosing a successor who backed up what they were preaching, all while setting records in an entirely new way. Dave's over here like, Disney's a great company. Like, this woman, she gets about a third of the being a woman who's really good at her job. She gets some of the credit, but also Disney gets a lot of the credit for being a company that hires the women, despite the fact that he kind of implied that they weren't giving men paid parental leave, but okay. And then he's over here like, but also it was me. Like, I also did this. It was also me as the man. I did this too. And I'm like, good. I know. Men need credit for everything, don't they, Dave? Good job, buddy. I'm proud of you. Before I left Disney, they gave me an assignment that my first work colleague some 20 years back likely wouldn't have seen coming. Didn't see that coming. It was a request to take on one final employee group. In my last year, I became chief ally for Disney's Pride Group, the employee resource group for the LGBTQ community. In that capacity, as a straight ally of my gay colleagues, I got to hear how their life experiences affected them as employees of the company. Aw, Dave, we're so proud of you. You got the straight ally position. Dave was the chief ally of the Disney Pride Group. First of all, why is there a Pride Group at Disney? Because Disney has never been a gay-friendly company. Let's just be clear really quick. Remember how Dave was all like, we acquired Lucasfilm, we were selling Star Wars movies, and then Star Wars is all like, we're gonna have the first gay character, we're gonna have the first gay character, guys. And then they had like, their first gay character was like this, like two women kissing in the very background of the movie, which Disney then cut out in Singapore because Singapore wouldn't show a movie with any type of same gender relationship in it at all, even if it was in the very background. Disney put it in there in a place that Singapore could easily cut out because they didn't want to cut into their profits by having to have actual gay characters. Can we just take count of how many times Disney's been like, this is our first gay character, and every time it's a thing where it's like either that character is not even a real character in the movie, they're just like a person in the background, or it's like the gay thing is so far in the background that they can just cut it out when they're selling the movie to countries that still criminalize LGBT activity. Can we talk about that? So yeah, Dave, Disney's so progressive with their Pride Group where you are the chief straight ally in charge of bringing justice to all of the gays. What the fuck? So I will give him like the tiniest little ounce of credit on page 156 where he says this. I happen to be a Caucasian, heterosexual, able-bodied Christian American man. Said another way, I haven't had the journey that would allow me to see how a person of color, someone who's gay, someone who lives life with a physical disability, or someone who practices a different form of faith or grew up in a country with fewer freedoms than mine may have worked through what I have. I've never experienced grief from a loss in my immediate family, never experienced the trauma trauma some have while serving in the military, don't know what it's like to battle depression. I have empathy and respect for those experiences, but I can't speak to what it's like to live any of those lives. The reason I will give him a little credit here is that if I'm taking into account that perhaps it is other straight white young men who are reading this book, which I don't know if it is, because I think Dave's audience at this point is like mostly women who got tired of Rachel. Like, that's really what it seems like, and I find that upsetting. But assuming that this book was targeted at young men who were once like him, I can see how positioning himself in that way to relate to them and then move into the topic of like, so actually there are people whose other experiences you need to take into account. Because here's the thing, guys, I'm never gonna say all straight white men are bad. I'm not one of those people who would say that. Every person has the ability to be a good person regardless of any, you know, attributes of how you're born or your situation. However, I will say that because a lot of people that have Dave's particular set of privileged identities tend to be in a position where they believe in like, oh, everything's a meritocracy. There are no barriers into anyone's way other than yourself and your mindset and that kind of thing. I think this could potentially be helpful to a lot of men who think that way, because I do know a lot of straight white men specifically who think this way, who can't really comprehend that other people have faced barriers that they haven't had to for that. And for him to say like, guys, I'm this type of person too, and I'm telling you, I genuinely have had to listen to other people's experiences and learn from that. I think that framing it that way could realistically actually be helpful, because when I think about some of the straight white men I know in my life, to have another person who they inherently trust, which it's kind of gross that they inherently trust a person for being like them in the first place, but let's just go with the basis that they do, and then that person is encouraging them to listen and improve. Like, I can see how that could be beneficial to society in the long run. So that is the part I will give Dave credit on, being like saying like, yes, this is who I am. If you are like this, you should be willing to listen to other people who have not had these same advantages as you. I'm glad he said it. However, then he continues to be the hero of his own story. Get ready, major cringe alert. You thought I've shown you guys cringe on this channel before. Oh no, you haven't seen anything yet. Get ready for this. The younger, sheltered version of me didn't have the benefit of learning from a community with the vast array of experiences that exist in this world of ours. I needed a first-hand look at what it might be like to live life in a different way. It has been a game changer for how I approach just about everything. I'm grateful for that perspective shift. In fact, I was so grateful that I got a tattoo. It's a single word. Ally. It sits on my right forearm just below my elbow and is a daily reminder to me, and more importantly, my children. It means I'll stand with you and advocate for your worth, especially if you don't have a loud voice or enjoy the same access that I'm... Oh my god, Dave. You got an ally tattoo, Dave. I mentioned earlier, right, that Dave is the cringiest dad to have in the world. And I started thinking from my perspective, okay, I'm like, me, as a queer woman, what if my dad, who is a straight white man, decided to get a tattoo that said ally on his arm? What would I think? And I was like, you know what, actually, if this happened at my age now, where I'm like close to 30 and I'm an adult, like, I would think it's kind of sweet, actually. I would be like, that's kind of nice. But if I had been a child, I would have been like, Dad, you're dropping me off 4 blocks from the party now. Holy shit, no one is going to see my dad with the ally tattoo. That is cringe, dude. Performative activism at its highest level. You got a tattoo that says ally. What the fuck, Dave? It's just another way of centering himself, of being like, I want to show everyone that I'm the ally. Look, guys, I have a tattoo that says, I'm a straight white man, but I'm one of the good ones, I promise. Not all men, guys, right? Dave! Again, I'm sure his heart was in the right place. Then the rest of the book, he just talks about how, like, he used to think that tall people couldn't be runners, which it's like, what? Where? When has that ever been a thing? I don't know. I need to be done with this fucking book at this point. This book as a whole, I am giving 1 star. Like, it was bad. It was bad because not only were parts of it offensive, but it was boring as shit. Like, at least Girl Stop Apologizing, which I also gave 1 star, but at least that book had, like, some interesting storytelling in it. At least that one gave more examples, and I had hated that book for being too vague and not giving enough business advice, but compared to this, I mean, that book is incredible compared to this. Holy shit. So 1 star to Get Out of Your Own Way by Dave Hollis. Apparently he's writing a second book, and I'm like, why? What do you have to say? You wrote that, you said nothing in this book. You said basically nothing, and now you're writing a whole second book to talk about what? To talk about the things that you learned 5 minutes ago from getting a divorce when you thought you were an expert a year ago when this book came out? Dave, what? I just can't see how he's credible to anyone in any way. It's like, yeah, I need to take my advice on how to overcome things and be resilient from a straight white man who worked at Disney for a long time and thinks that he's a super cool ally because he ran the Disney Pride Club or what. Like, Dave, what? Anyway, today's Deep Dave is getting really long, but that's because Dave is a really deep person we gotta dive all the way into. It's real deep when you dive into Dave. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this. There will be more Deep Dave episodes coming soon. I think next week Chewy and I are going to write the book together, but the week after that I'm hoping to have a Dave Ramsey video ready to go because I want to continue this Deep Dave series, and I'm also going to be doing a series about corporate cults, or like companies that are not MLMs but use some of the same harmful rhetoric that they do, since cult-like activity isn't exclusive to one industry whatsoever. So I'm going to be doing a video about WeWork. I might be doing a video about Theranos soon. I've got a lot of videos delving into businesses and business gurus and things coming up soon. Don't forget to subscribe to the second channel, Your Morning Guru, which is linked in the description below. We've got this merch. And if you enjoy the type of videos that I do, delving into business gurus, talking about what we can learn and also what we should throw away and what we should make fun of, if you enjoy how I try to take a balanced approach to everything, you will really love our morning show that streams every morning at 8 a.m. Central on the second channel. Please give that a subscribe. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, which is really fun. Thank you guys so much for helping me hit 20,000 subscribers on this channel. I'm very excited about that. I will see you all again on Monday. In the meantime, don't forget to support small businesses and have a fantastic weekend. Bye, everyone.